Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual launch of Dr. Patrik Marier's new book, The Four Lenses of Population Aging, Planning for the Future in Canada's Provinces. My name is Michelle Modin, and I'm Research Coordinator at the Centre for Research and Expertise in Social Gerontology, CREGÉS. CREGÉS is a research infrastructure that facilitates the sharing of knowledge and expertise between academic and practice settings. Its purpose is to stimulate, develop, and disseminate research in social gerontology and to support the development of innovative practices. I'm joined today by my colleague Karine Ohayon, by Tristana Rubio from Engage, Concordia Center for Research on Aging, co-presenter of this event. Tristana is going to tell us a bit more about Engage.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Tristana Martin-Rubio, the coordinator of Engage, Concordia Center for Research on Aging, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the launch of Patrik Marier's book, The Four Lenses of Population Aging. Thank you so much to CREGÉS for organizing the event, to the panelists, and to each of the audience members for being with us here today. So a few words about the center for those of you who may be less familiar. The center, Engage, is a Concordia Center for Research on Aging. We are an interdisciplinary center with exactly 35 faculty members whose collective expertise spans all of our academic faculties: engineering, arts and sciences, business, and fine arts. Engage brings together researchers, students, and community partners who are committed to advancing the study of aging in socially relevant ways. We do research that is participatory and collaborative, which means that we work to meaningfully adapt, strengthen, and integrate the perspectives and participation of older adults in our research mandate and our activities to promote an understanding of aging that as a biological and physical phenomenon that is nonetheless situated in social, cultural, and institutional environments. We are really thrilled to be here today to support the launch of Patrik's book and hear more about the book and the impactful and sustainable ways needed to address the needs of our aging population, as well as the lives of older people themselves. So with that, I'll turn the floor back to Michelle.
Thank you, Tristana. So I'm very happy to introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Patrik Marier is professor at Concordia University's Political Science Department. He's also a researcher, member of both CREGÉS and Engage, and principal investigator of the VIE, Vieillissement, Exclusion Sociale et Solidarité research team. He's joined today by Tamara Sussman, professor at McGill University School of Social Work, and also a researcher, member of CREGÉS, and by Dr. Laurel Young, music therapist, professor at Concordia University's Department of Creative Art Therapies, CREGÉS member, and associate director of Engage. So welcome to all, and thank you for joining us today. So Patrik, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for everyone joining us today on this webinar, and special thanks to both Laurel and Tamara for actually kindly agreeing to doing this in this format. So this book has been over a decade in the making, right? So originally, I wanted to transpose my training in comparative public policy beyond Europe. So I've written a lot about pension policies comparatively, and I decided I wanted to do something very different. So I wanted to write a book looking at all the 10 provinces with a view on how public authorities plan for an aging society. So it's pretty much every time we do a new census, right, we tend to talk and reemphasize, that our society is aging, and then there's an increasing, we have to think about all the issues that comes with population aging. So in order to do this, what I decided to do is to focus on senior civil servants. So those could be your senior policy analysts, deputy ministers, and directors, because they tend to pretty much focus on this issue on a continuing basis. Ministers come and go, but the civil servants, they remain, and they continue to exercise important influence in the policymaking. So as part of this book, I literally visited the 125 officials in all 10 provinces from a variety of departments, because I wanted to have a much more holistic understanding on how civil servant think about issues surrounding population aging. So as such, the primary departments, individuals within the departments I visited were in finance, health, social services, community affairs, executive council, also senior secretariat, gender secretariat. But to give you an idea of how long it really took to get this, so the book contract was already signed in 2010. So it was intensives in terms of each of the visits. I tended to spend a good week in each of the provincial capitals, sometimes a bit longer. So my journey as a scientific director at CREGÉS and involvement in the V team has had a very profound impact on the theoretical underpinnings and the content on this book, which while also being, I must admit, the primary source of delays in its publication. So first, I had no idea what really I was getting involved when I was recruited as scientific director in CREGÉS in 2013. So there was some sort of a perfect timing for me to embark in this adventure. Must admit that my curiosity and enthusiasm for the world of pension was waning, which I can best illustrated by an event I attended in Toronto where there was a lengthy debate on whether or not it was worthwhile purchasing 20-year bonds in a pension fund. So it was clearly time to move on into another area of research. And I also remember a lot of activities and exchanges with regards to pensions, where a few commentators will frequently point out this as well. You know, you realize that while we're having the discussion, there are other policy areas such as health where they're having these similar type of discussion regarding to population aging. And I must admit, in many ways, my move into CREGÉS and the then CREGÉS Cavendish, which was a smaller regional authority than we have now, was a culture shock, right? It turns out that the world of pension policy is very different than the ones aimed at providing services to older adults. So I left the world composed primarily of actuaries, lawyers, regulators, pension fund manager in the world of finance, with very few women, to one where now I ended up collaborating and working with social workers, nurses, community groups, managers, and member of the réseau, as we say, the health network in Quebec. So after a few meetings, I also realized that I was frequently the only man in the room on many occasions. So this divide also goes well beyond the professionalization and gender imbalance on these policy sectors. The organizational cultures are quite different. I was, for instance, originally taken aback by the rigid hierarchy of the health sector and the marginalization of social policy and services within the Ministry of Health and Social Services. So in many ways, this initial culture shock is really what's at the root of the four lenses that I discussed. So the intergenerational lens, the medical lens, the social gerontology lens, and the organizational lens. So in many ways, each of these lands, right, represents very different understanding of what population aging is and what the consequences of population aging are, and tend to focus and promote a very different type of policy instrument to address the potential consequences and benefits of population aging. The other key element, right, was really a constant pressure from my partner when I used to go out hiking with my camera lenses. As someone who's an avid amateur photographer, I always want to carry 3-4 photographic lenses on whatever the hike is, and then coming back with major back aches. So as a result, pretty much tended to focus, I have some sort of a rule that I can only bring 2. And that makes you think all the time about, well, what are you going to see on this hike? You're never too sure. You try to plan for it. And of course, you know, on many occasions, you end up with a very nice vista and you don't have the right lens, but still the exercise is a bit similar. And it's also the same type of thinking that civil servants, for instance, in the finance department will have when they think about population aging. They have a camera lens, a specific one, and they operate and they work with that one almost exclusively. So this provides a heuristic tool to illustrate the choice and consequences of each lens. Also in the book, so I end up concluding that there are some specific areas where you find each of these lens being prominent. For instance, the intergenerational lens is most prominent within finance department, the medical lens mostly within health departments. Organizational lens tends to be more at the cabinet level, at the executive council, while what's very interesting is that the social gerontology lens does not have that kind of strong anchoring. And I conclude in the book that this results in a marginalization on the social aspects of aging, which is the elements we work at CREGÉS. So without further ado, I'd love to hear from both Laurel and Tamara.
Thank you, Patrick. Tamara, would you like to?
Sure. So first off, I have to say, Patrick, that I loved your analogy of the photography lens. If you know Patrick and you've seen any of his beautiful pictures, you know this is another sideline that he has. And I just loved that metaphor for how a lens captures what you see and how you construct a problem and what you think of as the solution. So of course, just my background, I'm a social worker. Most of the work that I do is in long-term care and home care. And hence I really related to that tension that Patrick describes in the book between the medical lens and the social lens. You know, when I teach a seminar on aging to my master's students, I'll often say to them, you know, the term age in medicine is equated with biological degeneration. So just the medical understanding of age is completely roped into degeneration, disease, and illness. And while, of course, people want disease prevention, people want to age as healthy as possible. When you ask older adults what's important to you, most of them will say, as long as I'm healthy, that's aging well. When you are so dominated by that understanding of deterioration, you create this image that that's all aging is. It's something to be avoided. And we saw that play out so clearly, I felt, in the COVID-19 responses. You know, you would hear even our, Honorable Justin Trudeau, when he was speaking about aging, meaning to be supportive, would say things like, we have to protect those older adults because after all, at one time they contributed. Meanwhile, a high majority of caregivers are actually older spouses who were not just the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic, but were actually there as frontline unpaid workers supporting a lot of people at home that we didn't hear about. So I really, really related to that invisibility of the social model and the dominance of the medical model. You gave a lot of examples in your book, Patrick, about even the way we do home care assessments as social workers in the home care department in SAPA. As case managers, we ask a ton of questions, and a lot of them have to do with resilience and, you know, what you're doing well. But when it comes down to service eligibility, it's all about the SMAF score. It's all about the 12 functional items that basically transform a person into a level of functioning, into a body, into somebody passive. So I really, really related to all the examples. You have a beautiful chapter on home care. You have a beautiful chapter on long-term care, and the example of that tension between the medical and the social really stood out for me. I tell students all the time when I start talking in an aging class, headliner, our population is aging. What comes next? There's two things. Oh my God, our pensions won't be able to afford them. Burden. Oh my God, our healthcare is going to collapse. Dependence. Once again, that sort of tension between the medicalized, deterioration function piece versus The social piece, which accepts that there are deficiencies and changes in people, but questions why that is constantly the narrative. So many rich examples of that. And I would urge those of you who sort of work in health and social care, if you can't read the whole 300 pages, you'll really benefit from the chapters on the theoretical framework. And there's a couple of specific chapters on home care and long-term care that I think really encourage a critical reflection, because we become agents of the organizations that we live in and stop questioning why we do things in a certain way and how we are perpetuating these ideas. And I think this book really allows for some reflection. What I loved as a new form of engagement for me was, and this comes from your political science background, as a social worker, I'm always understanding policy has such a key role to play, but where to begin? I really loved the introduction of the organizational lens and the idea that we have to look cross-sectorally to start thinking of how to solve some of these aging problems. And how that spoke to me particularly in more recent years, I've started to get into other research projects outside of the obvious health. So for example, I'm doing some work with a bunch of colleagues, Patrik included, on aging and homelessness. Aging and homelessness is the perfect example of an aging issue that has to do with housing, it has to do with finance, and it might also intersect with health, because we know that older adults who are also precariously housed might experience chronic conditions more quickly and in a more accelerated fashion. And the services they need to be integrated. But if you're someone who's struggling with homelessness, you fall under the housing arm and you go into the shelter system. And that shelter system doesn't have training for dealing with aging, doesn't necessarily have health adaptations related to aging. So what happens when I need a shelter, but I have a walker? Or what happens if I need a shelter, but I can't quite manage a shower on my own? Well, what happens is you get cycled into the hospital, and then you probably get on a list for a long-term care home way before your time, because we're not integrating these problems at an organizational level. So I really appreciated, I've been writing a lot myself around we need to coordinate care, but thinking from my perspective, how the heck do you start doing that? I really appreciated your chapters on the sort of seniors, like how our political bureaucracy is structured and who's in charge of what. And when you understand who's in charge of what, you start to understand who you need to bring to the table to create sort of more organizationally cohesive programming, which I really see as the opportunity for some of these intersecting issues that I'm starting to get into now. So, I guess in a nutshell, I both appreciated kind of affirming what I know and I've been thinking about for such a long time, and also having a new lens from which to start unpacking and thinking about how to move forward with some of these other integrations. So even though at first when I opened the book and I said, okay, 300 pages, I haven't read a book in a long time, I stick to articles, I was engaged and I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed it and highly recommend, even if you're looking at specific chapters. So I will pass the torch on to my colleague Laurel, who might have some additional thoughts to share.
Thank you, Tamara. Laurel?
Great, thank you so much. And Tamara, everything that you just said resonates strongly with me, so thank you. You gave me good things to build upon. And thank you so much, Patrik and CREGÉS, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm going to take a slightly different approach, I think, because I'm assuming perhaps that some of you who are in the audience are wondering why a music therapist would be on a panel that's discussing a book around healthcare policy or population aging. So I want to make links in terms of how the material in this book can be very useful for various arts and health professionals. So I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, and this is not about me, but I kind of want to give you the lens through which I am looking at things, and then the lens through which I looked at the lenses, so to speak. So I want to give a little bit of background on that, and maybe also Patrik and Tamara, you'll find out some things about me that you didn't know. So I've been a music therapist for over 25 years, and I spent a lot of that time working with various segments of the older adult population. And actually way back, I was initially inspired to enter the field because of university student job experiences that I had working in long-term care facilities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So I feel like the provincial components of this book, I was able to kind of look at that from various provincial perspectives based on my own life experience. After completing a 1,000-hour internship at a large geriatric health sciences center in Toronto in 1995, I got my first professional job at that same facility. And I worked as the coordinator of a day program for persons living with dementia for 2.5 years. And then I subsequently worked at another large health sciences center and in a university-affiliated teaching hospital for a total of 12 years. And I held 2 roles in that hospital. I was a music therapist in the long-term care area, which mostly focused on older war veterans, World War I, II, and Korean War veterans. There was also a community palliative care unit there as well. But I also worked as a professional practice leader. And that was a facility-wide position where I was responsible for various practice research and education initiatives. But here is where I was truly exposed to the inner workings of the system. And so, for example, how healthcare organizations strive to meet measurable efficiency standards that are tied to government funding. And I also came to realize how these standards are either not well understood or decontextualized by the media, which leads to a lot of public misunderstanding. And how many of these efficiency standards do not always, and dare I say almost never, result in better care for patients. A large percentage of whom, of course, are older adults. And as we know, this number will continue to grow. So of course, we need to be fiscally responsible in healthcare and in all of the social initiatives. But what does that really mean? So as our population ages, how do we as a society do our best to ensure that a diverse population of older Canadian adults in various contexts, which includes us and people that we love, have the best quality of life possible and on their own terms? So I've always known that the answer to that question is incredibly complex. It seems like a simple question, but it is not an easy answer. But I found, Patrik, that your book really helped to explain why things are so complicated, both by outlining the administrative and policy challenges that have emerged over time. So I appreciated the historical perspective up to the present day. And you explained it in ways that are accessible to those of us who are not political scientists or policy experts. So I really found I could understand the material. What I also really did appreciate from a practical perspective in these days of rampant misinformation is that there are 70 pages of reference notes in this book. So I had breathed a sigh of relief when I realized there were 70 pages that I didn't have to read carefully. But where you list, though, all the sources for the information contained in the book. So I actually feel like I can trust what I'm reading, which I don't feel a lot of the time in many of the things that I read or hear in the media. I also really like that this book is a comprehensive research study and you're not confined to the page limitations of an academic journal, so you can really go for it. And it incorporates the lived world, the lived experiences, real world experiences of civil servants who you interviewed, with all of those policy documents. So it's not just a theoretical discussion, it's something that's really based. It takes that theory and ties it to real world perspectives. So I really appreciated that. Another aspect of the book that really resonated with me as a researcher, educator, and practitioner was how you situated everything and examined through those 4 lenses, reinforcing the idea that there is just not one ultimate truth. There are multiple ways to understand a situation. And we have to understand where others are coming from, even if we disagree with them, in order to have any kind of constructive collaboration to address all of the issues that are being raised. I also think it's important for researchers and practitioners who work with older adults to see or acknowledge where they actually situate themselves, either among or within these lenses. Because as Tamara said, we just don't think about that. We kind of work in the system and then forget about sometimes where we actually situate ourselves. So for me, as you may guess, I clearly situate my work within a social gerontology lens. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other aspects of the other lenses that might resonate with me. And I need to make informed decisions about what aspects don't resonate with me and why. So I think this book sort of gave me a framework to help me do that. And that helps me in moving my work forward. So I don't profess to speak for all arts and health professionals or music therapists. But in relation to that, this book helped me to reflect upon the disconnects among how we want to practice in relation to our work with older adults in various contexts versus how we actually practice because of various limitations that are posed upon us by complex systems. And I'm assuming, Tamara, it's very similar for social work and other social sciences professions. And also how we want to try to present our creative work, the arts and health folks, in ways that will resonate with predominant biomedical lens so we can get our toe in the door. So we often try to take what we know from a social gerontological perspective and put it into that medical lens so that they'll listen to us. But is that really the work that we want to do? And is that really the practice that we believe in? So I think sometimes too, that we have unconsciously bought into these predominant narrow definitions that are perpetuated by media and social media of what constitutes health and what it means to be old. So I would encourage my colleagues, other creative arts therapists, other arts and health professionals who are working with older adults or who want to work with older adults in various contexts to read the book so they can understand why they encounter various barriers in various systems, because it's more complex than I think we realize. Again, understand where they position themselves within these four lenses and recognize where they actually may have opportunities to advocate to work toward a Canadian society. And I loved this phrase, that supports a social standard of living. I don't know if I thought of it that way before, but it is. That's what I'm going for the work that I do, is to create a social standard of living for all segments of our growing older adult population. And I'm a bit biased, but I do think the arts and the arts therapies, including my own profession of music therapy, have a great deal to offer in this area, but we ourselves need to better understand the complexities of policies and government systems at various levels. I will reread this book again. And I will, as Tamara suggested, there's certain parts that I'm going to be revisiting multiple times because I don't think I was able to digest everything in one reading. If it took you 10 years to put this together, it's going to take me more than a few days to figure out everything that's relevant in that book to my practice, work, and research. And I think also, Patrik, that how all of this information applies is going to evolve over time as things change. I think it won't lose its relevance, but I think how we look at it and how we interpret it and how we use it will also continue to evolve. From a very practical perspective, I loved how you summarized each chapter with a conclusion section that highlighted salient points. I found that very helpful as a reader. It helped me to keep track of the rationale you were trying to present within each chapter. And it also helped me understand that I might have missed or misunderstood something. And then I could go back and reread that part and check it out to make sure that I got it this time. So I really did find that very helpful. And I have to give kudos to you, Patrik, because I think you really completed an impossible task by managing to organize the relevant policies of 10 provinces. That have quite different social and healthcare systems into a cohesive picture of the challenges and opportunities of population aging across our country, with the exception of the territories, of course. And then it made me start to think about all those national strategies that have been formulated or are being formulated, such as those related to dementia, mental health, and end-of-life care. And I'm thinking that those strategies really could use this book because it does give such a comprehensive perspective that I don't know. There may be something out there, but not that I've come across in my reading. So I'm now even questioning, after reading this book, if these types of national strategies are even realistic. Or are they as helpful as people think they are, or as they should be, given these systemic differences among provinces? Because I'm not sure that they can adequately be adequately realized without specific provincial and even regional considerations, including the urban and rural divide that you discussed throughout the book. That also really resonated with me as someone that has two places of residence. I'm a resident of Quebec and Montreal, but I also live in a rural area too. So I see that divide in the real world. And that was another part of the book that I thought was really well done. I'll end on one final thought. You do talk in the book several times about the fact that older adults are not a homogeneous population. And you do also talk about how certain segments of the older population are marginalized due to particular policies, or marginalized by the ways in which they are accounted for or not within the four lenses of population aging. So I'd like either your next book or other books that are building upon your book to really look at specific groups of marginalized older adults. I think that would be incredibly helpful for those of us in the social gerontology field and working in the social sciences. For example, racialized persons, person living with dementia, older adults with lifelong disabilities, the homeless population, as Tamara suggested, because everybody needs to be included in strategies and policies that are being developed to address the challenges and opportunities related to population aging. And I think the strategies and policies that we have are mostly not inclusive of older adults from diverse walks of life. And that's where I'd like to see some of the energy and trajectory from this book lead. So thanks so much, Patrik, for writing this book. And thanks again for allowing me to be on this panel. I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you, Laurel. Patrik, would you like to say a few words or respond to Tamara and Laurel's comments?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Well, first, thanks to both of you for very nice and generous comments, and also for taking the time to read this and think it through your own disciplinary lens. And in many ways, it's also a mirror reflection of the impact that you've had on me on my time at CREGÉS. So I'm very happy that you thought it was accessible, you could read it well. One of the key objective was to make sure this was not just going to be a public policy, public admin book, but that it could actually go much broader. So in that sense, of all the comments you made, I mean, that's the one I think is the closer to my heart, I think, in many ways. Like maybe if I go back almost in reverse order. Well, first I'd like to thank you, Laurel, for already doing publicity for the next research project, because Megan, Joy, and I are leading actually a research project right now that looks at the more public admin, public policy issues linked to coordination and governance across 6 marginalized population, and one of them is the homeless population, and that's the one Tamara is joining in. So we're also looking at the LGBT groups, immigrants, individuals who live in régions éloignées, poor rural areas far from a major urban center. We're also looking at individuals who had episodes of incarceration in their lives, and also people who had some episodes of psychiatric institutionalization. So we're working on that right now, but this time this book's going to be more of a collaborative effort. And so if we reach 300 pages, they're not going to be my own 300 pages. And also what I like is that you jumped on one of the elements that I've been focusing a lot lately on, the long-term care debate, which regards to the role of the federal government and these federal strategies. And I think in a lot of these, there's not that much connection with the provinces, or people fail to appreciate the distinctiveness of each province, especially if we go into the long-term care, the home care, because of this clause that puts long-term care as an extended service in the Canada Health Act. Provinces have spent 40 years on their own developing this field. So of course, whenever the federal government gets into this, it creates a lot of tensions, and then it raises question as well, whose standards we're going to pick, right? So how is this involvement going to occur? And this also happens in the context with which the federal government has constantly decreased its share of funding in health. So there's already a lot of tension from the provinces saying, well, this is our responsibilities, and we would be having these issues if you were paying 50% of the Canada Health Act, which we are supposed to do. Also, appreciate the fact that that you like the 70 pages of reference that is well detailed. I'm not sure the editors share your views, but as I was going along with this, I wanted to make sure that it was not going to be picked apart as some sort of anecdotal evidence. And it's also the way in terms of research design. So when you work with civil servants, it's always under confidence. So in some case, I could put the little quote. But it's true, I think for the reader, you need more than having faith in me that I reported the words of a civil servant that I cannot be identified. So it's kind of a catch-22 that way. And I might have gone a bit overboard and overcompensating for the lack of this type of input. And also very happy that for both of you, it does resonate with the practice and how we think of it. And the fact, and actually that's part of the reason I've always enjoyed discussions with you, Laurel, in the sense that with the music therapy, you have the art part, but you always have to put, some toe, sometimes not to say the foot in the biomedical to get recognition, right? So this tension is very present. And I think in social work, it's much more subtle. Like for me, what I've always liked with social work is if you were to think that if you were a social worker in Sweden, for instance, you would be working for municipal governments. And the person who ends up being the head of SAPA is a social work by training. So that's a very different dynamic, very different interpretation of assessment tools. So the social element is far more omnipresent. So usually in Scandinavia for long-term care type of inquiry, usually you ends up with half and half between people in a social field and people in the medical field. While in Canada, if you look all the big inquiries, it's dominated by people who come from the health sector.